There comes a point in your life when you realize not everybody deserves your energy. Not every comment requires a clapback. Not every storm needs your panic. Some of us are fighting battles that aren't even ours to begin with, carrying burdens God never assigned us to carry. And so today I came with a word for the ones who feel drained, distracted, and detoured. It's time to train yourself to be unbothered, not because you don't care, but because you finally learned what's worth your peace. See, the enemy doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes he comes with little irritations, distractions, and delays designed to knock you off course. But when you are rooted in who you are, when your identity is not based on opinions but on God's promises, you can look that nonsense in the face and say, not today. Being unbothered doesn't mean you're numb. It means you're disciplined. It means you've matured beyond reaction and into revelation. So before we go any deeper, I need you to make a decision. Are you going to keep reacting to every little thing, or are you ready to rise above the noise? Because the level you're called to requires focus. It requires spiritual boundaries. And it absolutely requires that you stop shrinking just to survive. This is your season to reclaim your attention, protect your peace, and train your soul to stand still while God fights for you. Peace is a choice, not a circumstance. That truth will challenge everything you've ever believed about how life is supposed to feel. Because if we're honest, most of us are waiting on something to calm down before we calm down. We think we'll feel peace once the job comes through, once the relationship is fixed, once the money hits the account, or once the apology is finally given. But what if peace is not found on the other side of the problem? What if peace isn't a product of your environment, but a power from within? There's a kind of peace that doesn't make sense, not to the world, not even to yourself sometimes. It's the kind of peace the Bible calls peace that surpasses all understanding. That means it's not attached to logic, it's not tied to evidence, and it doesn't require external validation. It simply is. And you access it not by changing your situation, but by changing your posture within the situation. You train your mind to stop rehearsing chaos and start hosting calm. You make a decision to stand still even when everything around you is telling you to panic. That kind of peace is cultivated, not given. It's built in silence, nurtured in surrender, and activated through faith. Sometimes we confuse avoidance with peace. We think that if we ignore it, if we don't talk about it, if we numb it, that we found peace. But peace isn't silence that comes from denial. It's stillness that comes from clarity. It's when your spirit is anchored, not because everything is good, but because you know God is good. Peace is birthed when you shift your trust away from your own ability to control outcomes and lean into God's ability to carry you through them. That's a different kind of training. That's not emotional numbness. That's spiritual discipline. Some of us keep forfeiting our peace because we're addicted to performance. We think we have to do, fix, handle, and manage everything. We think our value is tied to how much we can hold. But sometimes peace means letting go. Sometimes peace means walking away. Sometimes peace means being misunderstood and not explaining yourself. You have to train your soul to stop chasing validation and start receiving revelation. Because if your peace is always dependent on people understanding you, agreeing with you, or applauding you, then you're not walking in peace. You're walking in fear of rejection, dressed up as excellence. Choosing peace is not weakness. It's power. It's you saying, I'm not going to let this chaos define me. It's you realizing that inner stillness is a weapon. You can't fight every battle on the outside if you're losing the war on the inside. A person who's trained in peace is dangerous to the enemy because they don't flinch. They don't overreact. They don't fall apart every time something shifts. They've learned how to carry storms without becoming one. That's what God is trying to teach you, not how to escape difficulty, but how to carry dignity in the middle of it. You have to be intentional with peace. You have to protect it like it's sacred, because it is. There are conversations you no longer entertain, not because you're arrogant, but because your peace is too expensive. There are environments you no longer stay in, not because you think you're better than anyone, but because your soul can't afford the noise. Peace is not passive, it's a boundary. And boundaries don't just protect what's inside, they expose what doesn't belong. When you start walking in peace, you'll start seeing what's been disturbing it all along. And you'll realize it was never about them. It was about you giving away something that was never theirs to take. We live in a world that teaches us to react. Someone posts a comment, we respond. Someone disappoints us, we spiral. Something unexpected happens and our whole day is ruined. But what if peace looked like staying rooted even when the winds start blowing? What if peace was not the absence of storms, but the ability to sleep through one like Jesus did on that boat? That kind of peace comes from knowing who's in control. It comes from building trust so deep that even when the surface shakes, your foundation stands firm. And trust me, God is not pacing in heaven worried about how this turns out. So if he's at peace, maybe you can be too. You'll know you're training yourself in peace when you stop needing to win every argument, when you no longer rush to prove your worth, when you feel the urge to respond, but you don't, because your maturity told your emotions to sit down. That's when you know you're evolving. That's when you know you've tapped into something the world can't take from you. When peace becomes your normal, dysfunction becomes uncomfortable. You no longer thrive in chaos because your spirit has been reconditioned for calm. And that calm is a signal that you've healed from something that used to keep you bound. Peace is a decision you make every morning before your feet even hit the floor. It's a mindset that says, whatever comes today, I choose not to let it live rent-free in my spirit. You stop allowing small things to trigger big emotions. You stop leaking your power into things that don't matter. You realize that not everything deserves your energy. Not every invitation requires a response, and not every battle needs a warrior. Some just need a walker, someone who keeps moving and refuses to be pulled into mess. That's training, that's growth, that's mastery of the soul. Some of the most powerful people you'll ever meet are not the loudest in the room. They're the ones who can sit in silence and still have authority. They don't need to convince anyone. They don't need to be seen. Their peace speaks for them. Because when you know who you are, when you know who sent you, when you know what you carry, you don't let noise dictate your narrative. You walk in peace, not because life is easy, but because your spirit is grounded. You've been through enough to know that panic doesn't produce progress. So instead of rushing, you rest. Instead of fighting, you focus. Instead of reacting, you release. Peace isn't just what you feel, it's what you become. It shapes your tone, your presence, your responses. People feel it before you speak it. It changes how you walk into rooms, how you exit toxic conversations, how you navigate loss and disappointment. Because you've trained yourself to be unbothered, not unaware, not indifferent, but steady. You've made peace your home. You don't visit it when things are good, you live in it even when things go left. And that right there is a spiritual flex the enemy cannot counterfeit. Everything doesn't deserve your reaction. That right there is freedom. Because when you finally understand the weight of your energy, you start to measure what's worth spending it on. Some of us are tired not because life is so hard, but because we've been bleeding energy into every little offense, every petty comment, every insecure projection someone throws our way. We're in a constant state of defense, explaining, correcting, arguing, posting, clapping back. And for what? To prove a point? To protect our ego? At some point, you have to ask yourself, what is this costing me? Because peace is expensive. And too many of us have been trading it for crumbs of validation. You weren't built to attend every battle that shows up at your doorstep. Some of those battles are traps designed to distract, to drain, to delay your destiny. The enemy knows he can't stop you, so he settles for irritating you. He hopes you'll get so caught up in what they said, what they did, how they moved, that you lose sight of your mission. But this is where spiritual maturity kicks in. Because when you're growing, everything doesn't get your attention. You don't fight from insecurity, you fight from identity. And sometimes the greatest evidence of your growth is your refusal to react. There's a difference between being silent and being strategic. Being unbothered doesn't mean you're passive. It means you've developed discernment. You know how to weigh a situation and ask yourself, is this a seed or a setup? Is this an opportunity for me to grow or a trap to pull me out of character? Because let's be honest, some of the things we reacted to didn't deserve the energy we gave them. Some of the people we argued with were only loud because they sensed our light. Some of the situations we entertained were beneath the level we're called to operate in. If you react to everything, you give everything power over you. And not just emotional power. Spiritual, mental, even physical. Some of us are carrying anxiety in our chest because we don't know how to let things go. We rehearse every offense. We replay every conversation. We imagine what we should have said. We waste hours defending ourselves in rooms we're not even in. But God is calling you to a different level. He's saying, let them talk. Let them assume. Let them misunderstand. I will vindicate you in time. But that kind of trust takes discipline. It takes a deep understanding that silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. You've got to train your spirit to pause. That pause between the trigger and the reaction, that's where transformation happens. That's where your power lives. Because not everything that offends you needs to be confronted. Some things need to be ignored. Some things need to be surrendered. Some things need to be watched and not touched. Because when you're walking in purpose, you start realizing that every distraction comes dressed like urgency. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your life reacting instead of building, surviving instead of creating, defending instead of developing. God didn't give you your anointing for arguments. He gave it for assignments. And if the enemy can keep you in petty cycles of emotional warfare, you'll be too exhausted to move in destiny. You'll confuse busyness for progress. But real power is quiet. Real growth doesn't announce itself. Real healing isn't loud. It's present. And when you learn to conserve your reaction, you preserve your power. Because every time you respond to nonsense, you're telling the enemy you still have access to my emotions. But when you stay still, when you don't flinch, when you don't respond, you're saying, I've grown past that. I've trained for this. Not everyone who confronts you is qualified to correct you. And not every opinion is worth addressing. Some people aren't even talking to you. They're talking to the version of you that triggered their insecurity. So why waste energy correcting someone who isn't even looking at you through truth? That's when you have to go inward. You have to know who you are. Because when you do, their perception doesn't shake your position. When you know you're operating in obedience, you don't need consensus to feel confident. You're not waiting for their approval because you already have God's assignment. You don't need to react to prove you're right. Righteousness doesn't argue, it stands. And when God vindicates, he doesn't do it quietly. But your part is to hold your peace. Your part is to not allow temporary emotions to create permanent damage. Some of us have wrecked relationships, missed blessings, and delayed breakthrough because we couldn't stop ourselves from reacting. We had to say something. We had to get the last word. But at what cost? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and let your fruit speak for you. Discipline isn't just about what you say yes to. It's about what you refuse to respond to. Not out of fear, but out of focus. You're focused now. You've cried too many tears to go back to being easily triggered. You've healed too much to reopen old wounds for people who haven't done the work you've done. You're not who you used to be, and your reactions should reflect that. When people come looking for the old version of you, they should find silence. They should find maturity. They should find someone who doesn't need a clap back because their confidence is no longer fragile. Reaction is a reflex, but response is a choice. And part of training yourself to be unbothered is learning the art of choosing when to speak and when to stay quiet, choosing when to engage and when to disengage, choosing what is worth your peace and what needs to pass by without your energy. Every action doesn't need a follow-up. Every insult doesn't need a defense. Some things are beneath your calling, and the sooner you realize that, the more you'll protect what really matters. The more you grow in God, the more you'll be tempted to come down to explain, to defend, to argue, to prove. But you weren't called to come down, you were called to rise. And rising sometimes means ignoring. It means letting people believe what they want if it keeps you aligned with what God said. You can't keep trading your growth for their comfort. You can't keep abandoning your peace just to keep the peace. Sometimes peace requires distance. Sometimes it requires silence. And sometimes it requires the discipline to keep walking when everything in you wants to turn around and react. When you realize everything doesn't deserve your reaction, you begin to conserve your power for what really matters. You begin to understand that maturity is measured in restraint, not retaliation. You begin to see that silence isn't always defeat, it's direction. It's God saying, this isn't yours to fight. It's the Spirit whispering, keep moving, because some battles are beneath you. Some fires burn out faster when you don't add your voice to the flames. And when you stop reacting to everything, you start creating room for peace, clarity, and divine momentum. Silence is a spiritual strategy, not a passive escape, not a lack of words, but an intentional position of power. In a world where everybody's talking to be seen, talking to be heard, talking to be right, there's something radical, something holy about a person who chooses to be silent. Sometimes it's knowing exactly what to say, but choosing not to. That's maturity. That's discernment. That's wisdom born from pain, healing, and the kind of faith that doesn't need to announce itself to be effective. There's a weight that silence carries. It's not empty, it's full of restraint, full of clarity, full of trust. Because when you don't rush to fill the space with your opinions, your need to defend, or your version of the story, you make room for God to speak. You leave space for the Spirit to move. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and let heaven do the talking. Some answers aren't meant to come from your mouth. They're meant to come from your fruit. Some situations aren't meant to be confronted in the natural. They're meant to be surrendered in the spiritual. We often think silence means weakness, that if we're quiet, we're losing, that if we don't speak up, we're letting someone else win. But that's not how the kingdom works. In the kingdom, silence is sacred. It's where you hear God most clearly. It's where your flesh gets quiet enough for your spirit to rise. Silence is where strategies are born. It's where battles are won before they're even fought. The enemy doesn't know how to handle someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't panic, doesn't rush to respond. He thrives on chaos, but silence starves him. Silence denies him the satisfaction of seeing you unravel. Think about Jesus before the cross, accused, mocked, lied on, yet he said nothing. Not because he was powerless, but because he understood the assignment. He knew that silence in that moment was louder than any defense he could offer. Because when you're walking in divine timing, not everything deserves your voice. Your silence becomes a shield, a filter, a safeguard for your destiny. It protects you from unnecessary warfare. It keeps you from getting entangled in distractions disguised as urgency. It trains your heart to trust that vindication doesn't always have to come through confrontation. There's a discipline in choosing when to speak and when to stay silent, and that choice becomes clearer the more you mature. When you're growing in God, you start to realize that not every insult requires a comeback. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every opinion needs to be addressed. Silence becomes your weapon, your response, your peacekeeper. It's not that you're afraid. It's that you've already won. You've already decided that your time, your energy, and your emotions are too valuable to waste on things that don't bear fruit. And silence gives you time to discern whether what's pulling on you is purpose or a trap. There's something powerful about being able to sit in silence with your thoughts and still be okay. To not need noise to feel safe, to not need validation to feel seen. That's a sign that you've trained your soul to be still, that you've done the inner work, that you no longer need the outside world to affirm what God already told you in secret. Silence becomes your sanctuary. It's where you process without pressure. It's where you release what doesn't belong. It's where you hear yourself think clearly enough to separate truth from trauma, reality from reaction, and vision from distraction. Many people confuse loudness with leadership, but true authority doesn't always have a microphone. Sometimes real power walks in the room and doesn't have to say a word. Silence has a presence. It commands respect. It reveals strength. When you don't react to everything, people start to take notice, not because you're passive, but because you've mastered yourself. That kind of mastery doesn't happen overnight. It happens in quiet spaces, in prayer closets, in moments where God teaches you to trust Him more than your need to respond. Some of your greatest breakthroughs will come when you stop arguing and start listening. When you stop talking over the pain and start letting God minister to it. When you stop trying to fix everything with your words and start surrendering it with your stillness. There's a language the Spirit speaks in silence. It's where revelation lives. It's where instruction is downloaded. But if you're always talking, always moving, always reacting, you'll miss it. You'll miss the whisper because you were chasing the noise. Silence allows you to see clearly. It slows down your reactions so you can assess your reality. It gives you the upper hand in emotional warfare. Because the person who stays calm, who doesn't react, who listens more than they speak, they hold the room, they hold the atmosphere, they carry peace. And that peace becomes contagious. It shifts dynamics. It disarms offense. It settles storms. That's the power of a quiet spirit. It doesn't just protect you, it transforms the environment around you. You don't always have to have the last word. You don't always have to explain yourself. Some seasons require you to be silent so God can speak on your behalf. Some doors are opened not by what you say, but by what you don't say. Some relationships are healed not through confrontation, but through quiet intercession. Some battles are won not in shouting, but in surrender. Silence doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what matters most. Aligning yourself with heaven's rhythm instead of reacting to earth's chaos. The more you grow, the more you'll realize that silence is a choice rooted in security, in knowing who you are, in trusting who God is. You don't need to be loud when you're clear. You don't need to be defensive when you're anchored. You don't need to rush when you're aligned. And sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to say nothing at all. Because silence is not the absence of voice, it's the presence of wisdom. It's the decision to pause, to observe, to wait until the Spirit gives clearance to speak. In a culture that rewards speed and sound, silence becomes countercultural. It becomes prophetic. It sets you apart. It draws people to ask questions not about what you say, but about what you know. Because there's something about a person who's trained in silence. They carry something different. They've been in the secret place. They've heard from God. They don't flinch under pressure because they've already settled in their spirit what the outcome will be. They're not moved by emotion, by provocation, or by applause. They're steady because they've learned that some of the greatest movements of God begin in stillness. When God is getting ready to do something major in your life, He often silences you first. He closes your mouth so you won't sabotage it with words rooted in fear. He shuts down conversations so he can download fresh instruction. He silences your circle so you can hear his voice more clearly. That's not punishment, it's preparation. It's heaven pulling you into alignment, because sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is be quiet, be still, and let God be God. And when you train yourself to respond with silence instead of noise, you train your spirit to follow heaven instead of the world. Protecting your peace is protecting your purpose. The two are inseparably tied, because anything that disturbs your peace has the potential to disrupt your clarity, your focus, and your ability to move in obedience. Peace isn't just a nice feeling. It's a spiritual environment that cultivates purpose. When your heart is at rest, your spirit can hear. When your mind is still, your vision can expand. And when your atmosphere is clear, God can move without interference. That's why the enemy targets your peace first. If he can't take your anointing, he'll try to cloud it. If he can't steal your purpose, he'll try to suffocate it under noise, confusion, and constant distraction. You have to become intentional about guarding your inner world. That means paying attention to what gets access. Not everyone and not everything is worthy of entrance into the sacred space of your peace. Some conversations are too costly. Some environments are too chaotic. Some people are too unstable to be given unrestricted access to your emotions. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you wise. Because the more you protect your peace, the more you protect the clarity required to walk out your calling. Peace is where your purpose breathes. And anything that consistently suffocates it needs to be addressed, limited, or removed. There comes a moment in your growth where you realize your boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping you aligned. You've worked too hard to come out of dysfunction to let it back in through open doors disguised as kindness. You've prayed too long for clarity to now allow confusion to live rent-free in your mind. You've been healed too deeply to now entertain energy that keeps reopening wounds. Protecting your peace means recognizing the difference between what feels familiar and what feeds your future. Just because you're used to it doesn't mean it's healthy. Just because it doesn't look dangerous doesn't mean it's safe for your soul. Peace is also about pace. You can't run at kingdom speed while carrying every unnecessary weight. Purpose requires rhythm. It requires discernment. It requires stillness in motion, a sensitivity to God's leading that is only possible when your spirit isn't constantly agitated. Some of us are busy but not productive, moving fast but not forward, doing a lot but going nowhere. That's what happens when you're pulled in 100 directions and none of them are submitted to peace. You say yes to too much, agree with too many voices, and try to be everything to everyone, and suddenly your purpose feels distant, heavy, and hard to reach. That's not alignment. That's exhaustion. Protecting your peace means being willing to disappoint people in order to stay obedient. Not everyone will understand your silence. Not everyone will support your no. Not everyone will applaud your decision to slow down, unplug, or disengage. But your purpose was never a group project. You weren't called to be understood. You were called to be effective. And effectiveness flows from a well-protected soul. That means sometimes you have to step back. Sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes you have to prioritize what's going on in you over what people expect from you, because your assignment can't afford your burnout. There's a divine boldness that rises when you decide your peace matters. It gives you clarity to walk away from cycles that no longer serve you. It gives you strength to say no without apology. It gives you wisdom to recognize when something isn't right, even if it looks good on paper. Peace isn't just a passive state, it's an active decision. Every day you wake up and decide what energy you're going to allow, what conversations you're going to entertain, and what atmosphere you're going to create. That's spiritual warfare too. Not every battle is fought with swords. Some are won with silence, discernment, and distant. You cannot pour from an anxious place. You cannot serve effectively from a burnt out space. You cannot hear God clearly when your mind is cluttered. That's why protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's stewardship. You're stewarding your mental space, your emotional stability, and your spiritual sensitivity. When your peace is intact, your decisions are wiser, your relationships are healthier, your creativity flows, your discernment sharpens. But when your peace is under attack, everything becomes cloudy. You second guess your calling, you tolerate things you shouldn't, you react instead of respond. And that's how the enemy gains ground. Not by taking your purpose, but by weakening your peace until you start questioning your own voice. People will sometimes expect you to be available at the cost of your well-being. They'll expect you to carry things God never asked you to pick up. But protecting your peace means giving yourself permission to prioritize your assignment over their assumptions. It means drawing lines and not feeling guilty about it. It means knowing the difference between being led by the Spirit and being pulled by pressure. You were never meant to be a savior. You were called to obey. And sometimes obedience looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like quiet. Sometimes it looks like keeping your phone on do not disturb. While heaven resets your perspective, there are times when God will pull you into isolation, not to punish you, but to protect your peace while he prepares your next. Isolation is not always loneliness. Sometimes it's insulation. He's wrapping you in his presence so that the voices of others don't drown out what he's trying to reveal. That's why protecting your peace sometimes means protecting your space. It means guarding your ear gates, your eye gates, your time and your heart. You can't expose your spirit to everything and expect to hear God clearly. You have to be selective about your intake if you're serious about walking in divine output. Peace also